The Fed continues to seize control over the financial system. The suits and ties distract you with their antics. Puppets and nonsense keep your eyes off of the important things that are going on. There is no merger between the Treasury and the Fed. There was no nationalization. The Fed has become even more powerful, and those who used to stand against the horrible nature of a central bank have stood down, arms crossed, mission accomplished, right? You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. This is what's happening today. Your currency is becoming worthless, and it's because of your central bank. Do not accept the lies that you've been told from either side. The central bank stands against you. The central bank stands against humanity, and freedom and liberty must prevail. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet has expanded past $6 trillion as we expected. It is heading towards $6.1 trillion in fact. And if you look at today's numbers, which haven't been tabulated officially yet, it is actually closer to $6.3 trillion right now. If you don't know where the inflation is, my goodness, where have you been? Federal Reserve unveils details of $2.3 trillion in programs to help support the economy. This is yet another program that they've created, printing money out of thin air in order to get it to the businesses. That's right. They say it's going to the small businesses. They say that they're going to help out you and I, but we know how it works. All of the money goes to the big boys first. All of this, they are going to go to those big corporations, and you get the little crumbs that are left around. Any scraps left over, give it to the dogs. Fed Chair Powell says U.S. economy deteriorating at alarming speed when just a month or two ago he said the economy was sound. You look at the Fed meeting minutes and it was fantastic. Everything is fine, but there's this external thing that's happening, and we're going to do our best to make sure that we reduce interest rates and take care of that. Now they've set up different programs using every letter of the alphabet 2 times over, and they still think that to this time they need to do more. They need to stop what they're doing. They need to stop ruining the currency for every American. All of the central banks are basically doing the same thing to one degree or another, but the whole world looks to the Federal Reserve because they are the head of the snake. This is a Bloomberg opinion article, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but essentially what we're looking at is what the Federal Reserve has done, and he suggests here the Fed is seizing control of the entire U.S. bond market, and I do agree with that. The Federal Reserve is not leaving any corner of the U.S. bond market behind in this crisis. There is no other way to interpret the central bank's sweeping measures announced Thursday, which together provide as much as $2.3 trillion in loans to support the economy. It will wade into the $3.9 trillion U.S. municipal bond market to an unprecedented degree, can now purchase fallen angel bonds, remember we talked about that, from companies that have recently lost their investment grade ratings, and has expanded its term asset-backed securities loan facility to include top-rated commercial mortgage-backed securities and collateralized loan obligations. All of the things that we talked about in these previous years that were the biggest concerns, CLOs, corporate debt. We've talked about how bad this is and why this is a problem, and now the Federal Reserve is going to bail them out. All of these things are there. They're rotting. They're stinking. And now your currency is going to be sacrificed to bail this garbage out. It's garbage, it's trash, it needs to be disposed of, and instead it's gonna go onto the books of the Federal Reserve. Do you understand the implications of this? I still get comments from people talking about how fantastic it is that the Federal Reserve is there to save the day. People should get themselves a copy of the Atlantic where they describe Ben Bernanke as a hero. That's what they need, that's what they think, and it's ridiculous because it couldn't be further from the truth. Since that time, since the 2008-2009 time frame, who has benefited from everything we have seen? I'll tell you right now, the higher up on the scale you go, the better off you've done. If you go to the bottom 50% of the population in the United States, they are nowhere near anywhere that at the top, let's say top 10%, top 1% is. And why has that been? been? They've printed so much money. Interest rates are so low. None of that makes its way down to the vast majority of the population. And it has nothing to do with the fact that you bought 7 shares of Amazon and you think that, oh, I'm benefiting from this. There's so much more going on here. Even mainstream people like Tony Robbins have talked about it publicly. I thought this was really important, and I'm glad that by this point in the video, a lot of people have turned it off, because if you've stayed here, you deserve to know what's going on. This is huge. And do you see anybody in the alternative news covering it? Not really. Tucked into the recent recovery bill was a provision granting the Federal Reserve the right to set up a $450 billion bailout plan without following key provisions of the Federal Open Meetings Law, including announcing its meetings or keeping most records about them. You can read the rest for yourself, which I really highly recommend that you do, but think about this. The Federal Reserve has to record their meetings. The Federal Reserve has to make sure that their actions are at least somewhat transparent. That might be 2 years later, that might be a month later, whatever the case might be, but at least there's some form of documentation for the FOMC meetings. And the reason they did that was back financial crisis era, as it says down here in the bottom paragraph. This would address a complaint that the Fed faced during the 2008 financial crisis, when board members couldn't easily hold group conversations to address the fast-moving economic turmoil. Look, it's an emergency. We gotta act real fast. We can't have anybody else knowing what we're talking about. This is a group of criminals, and there has been no nationalization. That's ridiculous. They're going further away from it, and this is part of that. That bull needs to stop right now. The federal government budget deficit is on track to reach a record $3.6 trillion in the fiscal year ending September 30th. $3.6 trillion? This is unbelievable, and it could go even further than that. Let's see how much they actually spend. How are they going to pay this back? They're going to issue 50-year bonds. They're going to issue 100-year bonds, and someone's going to buy it, that's for sure. Doesn't mean it's going to be foreigners. Doesn't mean it's going to be domestic. The Federal Reserve can just print up the money out of thin air and buy every last one. JP Morgan now sees economy contracting by 40% in the second quarter and unemployment reaching 20%. There have been many estimates that I've seen, all the different banks. They vary widely, and to me, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a serious contraction. We know the numbers aren't really legitimate to begin with, but when they go to certain heights, we can at least acknowledge the fact that, okay, something seriously bad is going on. I've been getting so many reports from people all over the world telling me that they're out of work, they've been laid off, their family's been laid off, friends have been laid off. The situation is not good for the economy around them. Everything is closed. This can't not go on for too long, or there's going to be serious economic effects. The kind of thing that doesn't repair itself in a month or 2 months or 3 months. It will take a while. Now, the stock market, on the other hand, completely different scenario. They're pumping it up and they're devaluing everything that you save. Speaking of which, the Federal Reserve expands its shopping list to include junk bonds. Junk bonds. The worst of the worst. The Federal Reserve is going to print up money out of thin air and buy it up. And to be clear, it's junk bond ETFs. So when we talk about the Federal Reserve buying stocks, while they aren't technically buying stocks, they are, because they're buying ETFs. They are finding themselves tiptoeing further and further and further towards their ultimate goal of buying stocks directly. It is only a matter of time. Now, maybe here they won't be given that opportunity. If we see stocks rising and they go to new records, they won't really be able to justify the purchase of stocks, but they have already gone into basically everything else. There's nothing else that they can buy other than stocks directly. They'll be able to buy the ETFs, whether it's SPY or any of the others, and push that up to be whatever level they think is right. Somebody asked the question, what do corrections correct? You're not even allowing this to happen naturally, and so what are the effects of this? This is Ray Dalio. We are now at a point where there will have to be a debt restructuring, one of my favorite words, and a monetization of that. We're living in a different world, like the 1930s, in which you have a devaluation of the dollar, you have the printing of money. Monetizing the debt is always disastrous. Historically, there has never been an example ever where you could monetize the debt and get away with it. Today is no different. The IMF sees the world economy suffering its worst recession since the 1930s this year, with emerging markets and low-income nations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia particularly at risk. With half of the IMF's 189 member countries seeking aid, the executive board has agreed to double access to its emergency financing to meet the expected demand of about $100 billion. They could easily lend this money out. It's your tax dollars anyway. And here's the quote: "Because it is such a gigantic, dramatic development, a virtual standstill of the world economy, it requires massive, well-targeted measures. I am looking forward to seeing how far they'll go." This one is big. Bank of England to finance UK government crisis spending. Think about this for a second here, where in what the Federal Reserve does or what other central banks have done, they buy the bonds, maybe the Bank of Japan, they buy the ETFs, but you don't often find a central bank actually monetizing the deficit. The Bank of England is going into new territory. I think this is just out of this world. They're saying, we should be okay, but we're going to have the central bank just make sure that everything stays liquid. I mean, this is unbelievable. I don't know how bad it's going to get when they're telling us on one hand that everything's just fine, the stock market is going up, have no fear, and then we see all of these measures being put into place by all these central banks. So either everything is gonna be okay and they're just using this as an excuse to take over, or it really isn't and they're freaking out. Maybe it's a bit of both. Who knows? I had so much more to get into today. The video's already gone on way too long. I will probably do another one tomorrow. I'll try to get it to you in the afternoon. If you like this video, if you found it informative, just hit that thumbs up button. I really appreciate that when you all do so. It really helps to support the channel. If you want to see me on other platforms, I do content on Twitter and Instagram every single day. Definitely check me out there at The Money GPS. If you want to know how to sell online, but you don't want to pay $1,000 plus for a course, I created a free one for my subscribers. It's available at theamazongps.com. The financial system is convoluted, and it's done so on purpose so that you've got to ask other people for advice. In these two books, I give you the history, the foundation, the asset classes, break them all down, making it easy so that you can be empowered and make the right decisions. If you want to look through these books for yourself, check out the link in the description. If you are interested in the audiobook, that's available at themoneygps.com. This is an extremely important video. Take the time to watch it if you haven't already. Click on it and I'll see you over there.